What's up, everyone? Here we are in lesson number 6 for our beginning improvisation lesson series. You made it all the way. This is the last one. Today, we're going to talk about kind of putting all this stuff together to help you make some good solos on a B-flat blues. I know you've heard me say it this entire series, but make sure you check out the stuff in the virtual studio. There's a great extra practice session for all these lessons, some good handouts, all that type of stuff that you can check out to help you get started as improvisers. So that solo that I just played up top, what was sort of the main driving force behind that? That's the type of solo that I want all of my students who are just getting started on improvisation to be able to play after working on this for maybe a couple weeks, maybe a couple of months. Aside from all the stuff that we've already talked about in this series, great sound, great rhythmic feel, good rhythmic ideas, this was really built on two kind of harmonic or melodic ideas. That is playing basic arpeggios and chord tones and playing blues ideas. Now, we've already worked a fair amount on playing blues ideas in this series, and we just barely got started with arpeggios and kind of understanding the chords with the last lesson. So today we're going to kind of fill out that arpeggio knowledge for a B-flat blues and talk about how we build this all together to create nice sounding solos. If you haven't checked out lesson number 5, be sure to click on the link down in the description. Some of what we cover today will be really built on what we covered in lesson 5, so very important they have that information firm. As we talked about in lesson 5, our blues basically has 3 chords, or at least when we're working with our most basic version of the blues. We've got a 1 chord, a 4 chord, and a 5 chord. Here in the key of B-flat that we're working today, that's going to be a B-flat chord, an E-flat chord, and an F chord. In that last lesson, we just worried about the roots. Today, we're actually going to worry about building these chords and how we can build some melodies with them. So we need to know that these are all dominant 7th chords, at least for now, in our blues. And to build a dominant 7th chord, what we want to think about is we have a major triad on the bottom, and then we have a 7th added on the top that's actually altered. It's lowered by a half step. So we have like 2 parts to this chord. Let's build each part independently. I think that's the way to success with getting some of this stuff together. So let's start with our triad. That is the bottom of the chord, and that's like really the meat of where the harmony is. Whether we have a major triad or a minor triad is one of the key things that we need to worry about with any chord. My chosen method or preferred method of building these is to use sort of a scale degree approach. If we're starting with our B-flat chord, we want to temporarily put our brain into the key of B-flat and into a B-flat major scale. Now this song is in the key of B-flat, but each time we get to a new chord to use this approach, we might want to think in the major scale that is connected to the root of that chord. So if we're in B-flat, what we're going to do is just like we did for our Roman numerals in the last lesson, we're going to think about each scale step as having a number. B-flat is 1, C is 2, D is 3, so on and so forth off the scale. Our major triad is built off of the root, or 1, the 3rd, and the 5th. So to get there, we just think about that major scale. You do the first note, we go up to the 3rd note, and up to the 5th note. This is going to work the same in every major scale, and this is how we build our most foundational harmonic structure of a triad. So we can do this in any of our chords that we have in the blues. Let's check it out in E-flat. So if we think about our E-flat major scale, we think about our root, E-flat, F would be 2, G would be 3, so we're going to need that G for our chord, A-flat would be 4, we don't need that, and then B-flat, that would be our 5th. So when we put that E-flat together with G together with B-flat, we get our arpeggio. And again, this is the most foundational building block of kind of the harmony that we're going to use for this tune. So there's actually a number of ways you can think about building these triads. That's my preferred method, but another way that I often tell students to think about is what do they look like visually on the page? At least when they have the root on the bottom, they are going to stack up like an ice cream cone, or line, 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 or space, space, space. Now we would have seen that with our 2 other chords, but let's look at this on our last chord that we need for the blues. We've got an F chord that we need to build. So we start on F, and if we do this in our middle register, that F is on the line. So rather than worrying too much about the scale here yet, we're just going to think about what is my next line up, and then what is my next line up above that. So I'd have an F, then I build up to an A, and then I build up to a C. Now, the tricky thing with this is you do have to make sure you apply key signatures appropriately here. So like I said, you got to temporarily think in the key of F while you're building this chord and think, all right, well, what is actually my key signature in F? Are any of those notes going to receive an accidental? In this case, they're not going to, but in some keys, they might. So you just have to make sure you're being really careful when you're using this technique. It's a little bit of a shortcut. Maybe not as precise as the first way we talked about using the scale degrees, but can really get you started and sometimes is a little bit easier. All right, before we put it in the context, just to review, we've got 3 chords, 3 arpeggios. Let's put this into context in our blues. Now we could just play these as quarter notes or something like that on each new chord when we get there, but instead let's put a little bit of rhythmic vocabulary so we get that practice on rhythm and actually getting ideas that might be more similar to what we play sooner. So we're gonna play this rhythm. Each time we get to a new chord, we're going to change that new chord. So the first chord is a B flat, so we're going to play our B flat triad. Second chord is an E flat, we're going to play our E flat triad, and so on and so forth through the rest of the blues form. This is super fundamental practice, might be a little bit redundant for some of you, but really, really important if you don't have this ability to build these triads quickly developed yet. So once we've got our triads really working, remember, that's the meat of the harmony. So super, super important that we have those triads. Even though these are dominant seventh chords, the triad is where most of the harmony lives. Once we've got that together, we've got to add our sevenths to make sure that the chord quality is correct. So if we take our same procedure that we started with, and we just go up to the seventh note in the scale. That's going to be an A natural. So again, that's going to stack another third on top of that triad, or another line in this case of B flat. But that is actually not the right type of chord quality for this type of chord. That would give us what's called a major seven, because our seventh is unaltered. We want to have what's called a dominant seventh. That is going to have a lowered seventh step, or a lowered seventh note in the chord. So we just add a flat in this case. Now be careful, you're not just necessarily adding a flat, you're lowering it a half step. It just happens to be, in this case, we start with a natural on the A, so we're going to go to an A flat. So then our arpeggio sounds like this. We can do the same procedure with our two other chords in the blues. So we have an E flat chord, we've got the triad on the bottom that we already learned. We go to the seventh note of that scale, it's a D natural, lower it down a half step, it becomes a D flat, and then the same procedure for F as well. I love this way of building chords where we really think about scale degrees and connecting major and minor triads, and then what other notes we need to alter, because this is going to serve you really well when you get to more complicated harmony, because then you can build every chord with sort of the same procedure, rather than starting out by thinking some sort of like combination of major and minor thirds and stacking them above each other. That's a very common approach, but not necessarily my chosen one. This works in every case really easily and the same. That's what's important. So as we're building that sort of mental skill of building chords, we already have like a system developed. The next step would be to take this and move this through our blues form, just like we did with our triads. But today we're actually going to skip that step and look at just a little different way of practicing these. So I'm going to play a little example solo to check out where I just use arpeggios, and we're going to see what it sounds like. The question might be, why did that sound a little bit more like a solo and less like an exercise where I'm practicing scales or practicing chords? There's a few characteristics that I would say I tried to bake into that solo in order to make it feel more kind of realistic or more idiomatic to how we actually improvise. Let's look at just the first couple of measures to see how this works. So in the first bar, I played a D to an F to a D. Those are all chord tones, but I did not play that entire chord, and I don't actually need to really like feel like I'm inside the harmony. And then in the second measure, just a root and a third, two members of the chord. Now when I get to the third measure, I did actually end up playing the entire chord, but I didn't do it just from the root up. I did it starting on the F, I jumped up to the B flat, and went down. Now, this way of playing does require that you've done a fair amount of practice on your chords, so you can play them up and down, all inversions. We didn't talk about inversions yet. Basically, we're just changing the order that the notes come in, but practicing a lot, getting a lot of repetition, so that way you can draw on them in a number of different ways to make them sound more melodic. The second characteristic of that little example solo is that I was always looking for sort of close resolution points between chords. Again, let's just look at the first couple bars. So the first measure, I play D to F. When I get to the second measure, I wasn't really thinking, oh, I've got to play a root position chord here, or I'm really like trying to hit certain chord tones. I'm just thinking, what is close to those two previous notes that I played? In this case, it was an E flat to a G. Both notes just move up. One of them moves up a half step, one of them moves a whole step. I don't care about any of that. I'm just looking for close resolution notes. Now, if we even take it a step further and go to the third measure, my first note is an F. So it's actually close to both E flat and G. And then I go in a little different direction. I jump to the B flat. But it's all about thinking about these close resolution points that make it sound melodic. The final thing that really helps this arpeggio-based type of soloing feel like a melody and feel good is the rhythm. We've talked about rhythm a lot in this series. And if we play these type of ideas with an unconvincing rhythm, or maybe like a feel that just is sort of like, oh, I'm playing an exercise, this is a drag, it's going to sound like a drag. But if we play it with some convincing rhythm and articulation, it really feels great. Let's look at the last 4 bars of my example here. So for here, I just played up the triad in the F chord, and then I put up to the entire E flat dominant 7th chord. What if I played that with, kind of a more lame rhythm and maybe played it without so much convincing articulation? That doesn't sound too happening, right? It really sounds like an exercise that I'm like trying to pass a test to prove that I know these chords. But if I throw some nice rhythm on there, some good articulation, it's just going to sound so much more convincing. These simple building blocks of triads and dominant 7th chords are really the path to sounding like a successful and competent improviser on the blues or any other tune. Now, this does limit you a little bit. You don't have a ton of other melodic choices, but what if we just added a little bit of extra options? We take some of our blues ideas that we've already worked on in this series and hopefully you are already working on or maybe already have under your fingers. Let's say I did something like I play the first 2 measures of each phrase as an arpeggio-based idea, and I play the second 2 measures as a blues-based idea. That's going to give me, I think, a pretty convincing sounding solo. Let's check it out. Now, certainly nothing earth-shattering there as far as like new ground that hasn't been kind of played by jazz musicians before, but if that was like my first chorus of a solo I was taking, I'd feel pretty confident about that statement. I'm inside the changes, I play some nice melodies, there's really clear phrase structure, and there's also clear ideas. So this path of really focusing on, can I play arpeggios and sort of weave in and out of them with maybe blues ideas, other melodic ideas, even other, passing notes and that kind of stuff, depending on where your development is. This is the path to being a successful improviser in that first, couple months, even couple years of practice on this stuff. As with all things improvisational, listening is the key to getting this stuff kind of in your ears and eventually on your horn. To finish out our series, we're going to check out one of my all-time favorite solos, definitely on a blues, by the great Steve Davis. Steve Davis's playing has been a huge influence on my own playing, and this track in particular, I think, really connects with what we're talking about today. The song is called Blues Across the World, and it's on his album Meant to Be. I'll throw a link down in the description as always, and if you want to, maybe check out just a little bit more of what's going on in this solo, I also did a solo breakdown, a transcription breakdown on this solo a while ago. I'll put that link down in there as well. It kind of has some of the ideas, different licks and stuff from the solo broken down and things that hopefully you can practice. All right, that does it for us. You made it all the way through these first 6 lessons. We really delved into rhythm, building great ideas with small chunks of notes. And then on these last couple lessons, really dug into the blues harmony a little bit so you can understand what's going on in that tune and then start to use some of that information to build melodies. I hope this series of lessons has been helpful for you as you get started as an improviser. And as always, we'll see you in the woodshed.